Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha.
The why behind it. Why is it? What is it that brings them a sense of meaning and purpose? Leave it as open-ended as possible. Open that door and see where they go with it. Excellence is not being pursued at the expense of their mental or physical health.
I was just very desperate for a community.
Either they don't know the words to use or they otherwise are unwilling to share their perspectives. And that's really what college is about.
The transition from high school to college is a process that can be exciting, scary, and challenging for students embarking on a new journey in life. And there are things for college success, academic and personal, that you just can't find at those big box stores, despite what their ads want you to believe. A new course at Washington University aims to ease the transition by offering first-year students practical tools that can help new collegians manage all that comes with school and living life in a new environment, especially post-COVID pandemic. Joining us to talk about that course is Tim Bono, the Washington University professor behind the design of Bearprints for Success and who's teaching the course too. Tim, welcome back to St. Louis on the Air.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Now, you've taught a similar version of this course in previous years, but the content was designed originally almost a decade ago. So what is different about the world today that makes a new class about happiness and transition necessary?
Yes. Well, the original course that I designed about 10 years ago was looking at the science of happiness, and we pulled some of the content into that and from that material into a course that we called The Psychology of Young Adulthood. I think that the biggest difference that we have is that we've seen a dramatic increase in mental health challenges over the last 10 years, and we are addressing that specifically along with a lot of the challenges that students are facing coming out of COVID. Mm-hmm. So we know that COVID amplified a lot of the isolation that students were experiencing, some of the mental health challenges, and also there's a certain political polarization that we're experiencing now that has always been there to an extent, but has really been amplified in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And that is exacerbated by young people coming together in a place that is new.
Yes, of course. We know that any major life transition can be a time of stress and anxiety, but in the case of the college transition in particular, where you've got a new social setting, new academic expectations, all this free time you have to manage, and really important decisions you're having to make about your courses and your career path, all of that comes together to combine for some complexities that they have to navigate.
Mm-hmm. And those are complexities that have always existed. But what is it about the pandemic, Tim, that changed how students think or experience their academic or personal lives?
Well, I can tell you that from a psychological perspective, arguably the single strongest predictor of well-being in our lives has to do with the sense of connection that we feel to other people. So when we were in lockdown for a period of time, we did not have as much opportunity to keep that skill sharpened. And I think it's important to think about sense of belonging and the ability to develop relationships with others as a skill, one that has to be practiced. And so if you're out of practice with any skill for a long time, when you come back into it, there's going to be some difficulties as you're getting back into the swing of things. Mm-hmm. And so we are observing that. I think all levels of education, whether it's K-12 or college, are seeing that. And so we thought that a course that addressed that specifically could be useful for our students.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to invite you to this conversation. What was your transition from high school to college like? Were there resources that helped you in the first few months in particular? Or if you had a hard time adjusting, what do you think could have helped? If you are or were once a college student or someone who's worked with college students, we want to hear from you. Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. Or you can send us a tweet at STL On Air or email us at talk@stlpr.org. Now, this class is a 1-credit course, and it has 15 sections. And there are a lot of students who will be taking this course. From your research and experience, Tim, what are some of the challenges that students face going into college?
Well, I think that a big one has to do with the set of expectations that they bring with them to college. So, for example, one of the activities that I usually do with the entire class, almost 2,000 students on the first day of orientation, is I'll say, have you heard the phrase that college is going to be the best 4 years of your life? And almost everybody says yes. And then I say, do you expect for you personally that college will be the best 4 years of your life? And a huge number of them still keep their hands up. And I even did this during COVID when all of the orientation modules were on Zoom. This allowed me actually more scientific precision because we had online polling software. And even then, like 40% of these students during 2020 said that they thought college would be part of the best 4 years or the best 4 years of their life. And I thought, if anybody is expecting 2020 to be a year that is part of the best 4 years of their lives, they might have some misguided expectations. So I think that that's a big one. The students see these sensationalized messages about college, and I think that unfortunately that can set them up for disillusionment when they inevitably have difficulty with a roommate or a class.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, finding community and friends, homesickness is sort of a part of the experience that many have. And then you talked about polarization, right? Is there something that you have observed over the last couple of years that has made you feel that first-year students in particular could really use a course like this, where maybe pre-pandemic that was not necessarily the case?
Yes, and I think, as we were designing this class, we were very thoughtful about bringing as many perspectives as we could get. So we had focus groups with faculty, with staff, with upper class students. And one of the themes that continued to emerge is that students had a reluctance to really engage meaningfully with others who were different from them, whether that was in terms of their background or their philosophical perspective. A lot of professors have noticed that in small discussion-based classes that there's a lot of silence, that people, you can tell, have something on their mind, but they don't know the words to use, or they otherwise are unwilling to share their perspectives. And that's really what college is about. It's about the exchange of all of these ideas, bringing different people together who have different perspectives. But that, I think, is one of the things in particular that we really want to encourage people to get some skill at, is how do you approach people and share a perspective that's different and hold your ground, but in ways that are respectful and open to at least understand another's perspective without necessarily having to convert their way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a course that a lot of adults could use,
I
frankly.
agree.
Now, mental health is something that you've mentioned, and in the last few years, there has been a noticeable rise in mental health struggles amongst student populations. And here in St. Louis, on the SLU campus, St. Louis University, and WashU campus, there were a handful of tragic cases of deaths by suicide. So obviously there's no fix-all solution. How do you think a course like this can give students a way to cope with something like that that's not necessarily just about academics or just about what happens outside the classroom?
Yeah, a part of what we want to do with this course is break open dialogue around mental health, and in particular, some of the warning signs that you can identify even very early on before it escalates into something bigger, so that people can identify those warning signs in themselves and in friends and roommates and others that they see on campus, along with an understanding of the resources that are available to them. In addition to resources like the licensed clinicians at the health center, we also are giving our faculty and staff training on things that they can say to have an initial conversation. If they do notice some signs in a student that are concerning to them, how do you initially break open the dialogue that gets them talking about things in a way that maintains a comfort level where they're willing to share and disclose concerns, that then becomes the triage into those who are specifically trained and licensed to address those larger mental health challenges.
Mm-hmm. We have Stephanie from St. Louis on the line. Stephanie, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, thanks.
Hello, go ahead. Yes.
So I was just listening to the story, and I went to an out-of-state school. I went to University of North Carolina, and they only accept 12% of students from out of state. So I felt very isolated when going to a big campus, and I didn't feel very equipped to put myself out there and to make social connections. And so I did so through Greek life, which looking back, I think wasn't necessarily what I would have chosen to do, but I was just very desperate for a community. And I wish there had been more direct outreach from other, I don't know if it's other clubs or groups or even just people in my dorm coming to invite me to something or bring me along versus an on-campus activity being advertised. We're having an activity in the quad at 5 p.m. Come to it. I felt so lonely and stupid and weird to go do that on my own.
Yeah. Stephanie, may I ask when it was you were in college?
Sure. 2006 to 2010.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah. And that's a great example, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing that. And certainly that's one of the things that we know that goes back to our earlier point, that a sense of belonging is really foundational to a sense of well-being and also to a student's ability to be successful in their classes. And that's one of the things, when we talk about the differences 10 or so years ago, that colleges have become much more mindful of, allowing students to develop those connections and those bonds with other students, whether it's how to engage others if you see them going out to the quad for the movie night or how to formally become involved in a student organization. Teaching students about the importance of that as well as the pathways that allow them to form those connections, that really is at the foundation of their well-being.
Mm-hmm. And before we move forward, we were talking earlier about those tragic incidents at local colleges. And we should mention that the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number is 988. And that line provides free and confidential emotional support to people in crisis or emotional distress. And colleges and universities have resources as well. Tim, what kinds of resources are available on WashU's campus?
Sure. So we have a large set of counselors at the Habib Health and Wellness Center. And those, again, are trained counselors who are available, who can offer official diagnoses. And there's an emergency line in case a student should need that. But again, a lot of our faculty and staff also receive additional training all throughout the year. And we have student staff, the RAs in the dorms, who are on the front line. Even though they're not clinicians, they at least can. They've been trained at how to identify warning signs that they can then lead someone or put them in touch with resources for those who can offer them more formal diagnosis and intervention.
Mm-hmm. Tim Bono is whom we're speaking with now. He's an associate dean for assessment, that is, in student affairs and a lecturer in psychological and brain sciences for the College of Arts and Sciences at Washington University. We're talking about a new course that is offered for first-year students, sort of making that transition from high school to college. Beyond the individual, how much does community well-being come into play, especially considering how much time first-year college students have spent inside, at home and not at school, out in the community during that pandemic period when they were in high school?
Yeah. And again, the importance of community certainly cannot be overstated. And what we're finding also is that the role of technology is also providing an impediment to students' abilities to meaningfully engage with each other. There's something important that happens when people occupy the same physical space that can't be replicated behind a Zoom screen. I think that we're seeing this play out in businesses where a lot of business, even Zoom, I've heard, has been telling their employees that they have to come back and work in person because there's value in having everybody together in the same space. And the same is true of college students, that I think that we relied, because we had to rely on Zoom and other behind-the-screen forms of communication. It seems easier, and so a lot of times we're continuing to do that. But getting back in person is extremely important for any sort of, both in the classroom and activities outside of the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about the course itself. One of the things that you go through right at the beginning is purpose. And many students go into college, there's sort of a faint idea of what they want to study or what they want to do in the future. And obviously that changes over time. How do you teach and encourage students to find purpose as an incoming student, especially given that probably there are going to be changes to that as they go on?
Yes, or if they think they know what their purpose is, it might change or evolve over time. So we were very intentional about putting the topic of purpose as the first topic that is covered this week, the first week of the class. And we want students to be thinking not just about what they're going to be doing, what their dreams are, what kind of profession they want to fulfill one day, but also the why behind it. Why is it? What is it that brings them a sense of meaning and purpose? Because the reality, when you look at the career data, a lot of people change careers over the course of their lives, but you can always carry who you are with that. And so if you are the kind of person who wants to be in a helping profession or who wants to make a difference in environmental outlets or other things, keeping that sense of purpose with you, we know is important for the perseverance that is going to be important for maintaining a sense of resilience when there's inevitable adversity at points during your career, or you have to shift to something else for any number of reasons. Always being grounded in your purpose can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Now, healthy excellence, that's interesting. It's another topic that you are going to be going through with your students. WashU undergrads, they're known to be high achievers. So teaching students how to avoid a toxic competitive culture, leaning toward healthier practices of excellence. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, you're exactly right that we do know that our students are known for being very ambitious and wanting to achieve excellence. And we want to ensure that that excellence is not being pursued at the expense of their mental or physical health. And so that's where a large part of this course and of the philosophy of our student affairs professionals is all about helping students to identify the initial signs of stress and the importance of things like time management, the importance of things like being grounded in their purpose, so that when they have to make decisions about how they're going to spend their time and how they're going to structure their day, that they are incorporating self-care behaviors, that it's not something that they only wait until the moment where the distress has taken over and they're in breakdown mode, but rather that they're prioritizing sleep and exercise, that they know who their outlets are, and that there's a comfort level in reaching out to them on the front end so that they're proactively incorporating that. And one of the things that we like to tell the students is that self-care is not selfish, but rather it's something that is worthwhile and positions them to maintain the excellence that they want to achieve in the long run versus, pushing too far at the beginning and then feeling burned out later on.
And are there ways that you encourage that self-care, for example, in ways that are culturally sensitive and responsive? And if you could provide a couple of examples of that, that'd be great.
Sure. So certainly we value the cultural differences and backgrounds of all of our students. And a large part of it, when we are developing these programs, we will invite students in. We will hold focus groups. We will work very closely with our Center for Diversity and Inclusion to ensure that the language that we are using is inclusive, so that all students, regardless of their background or their identity, feel like they can be part of that. So for example, our Center for Diversity and Inclusion has a space where students can come in and just hang out or grab a snack and form community. Again, that's kind of been a theme, and it's worthwhile for it to be, so that helping them develop a sense of community is, I think, a really important aspect of that healthy excellence.
Mm-hmm. So also then creating those spaces as well.
Yes, having like a physical space where they know students can go, that is a starting point for all of this.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the distress and the stress, what are initial signs? Are there a couple of them that kind of show quite immediately, sort of across all groups of students?
Yes, great question. Typically, what we will look for are changes in behavior, because it can look different, from one person to another. There are some people who are just chronically late, or some people who just don't have a large appetite, or some people who really can get by with 5 or 6 hours of sleep at night. But what you want to identify is the baseline for any given individual. And then if you notice that the grades are starting to slip, that they're not coming to the dining hall, that they're not participating in things, that they're late for things when usually they were on time, identifying those behavioral changes is usually a good starting point. And then you can break open a dialogue, not by saying, hey, I think you're depressed and you need to talk to somebody, but rather saying, hey, you used to come with us to dinner every night at the dining hall, but we haven't seen you. I was just wondering, what's going on there? Focusing on behavioral change is usually a good starting point.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that saying that if you notice someone is not coming to the dining hall, you should reach out, that is helpful?
It is, yes, it can be, because, again, you're not putting a label or a judgment on it. You're not saying, why is this happening? What's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? But just instead saying, you sort of put it on yourself to say, I miss seeing you as often at the dining hall, because that's communicating two things. It's saying, number one, I'm noticing a behavioral change, and number two, probably more importantly, I care about you and I've missed you, that this is going on. And leave it as open-ended as possible. Open that door and see where they go with it.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that students, that they're ready to talk about transition? I mean, do they take it seriously? I mean, young people may have, not just young people, but in this case, they may have some hesitation about opening up with people they do not know very well.
Yes, that can certainly be a barrier if for some, especially when these are very personal issues or challenges or levels of distress that they perhaps have not experienced before, and then you're in this completely new environment. It can be difficult for them to reach out, and that's where ensuring that students know who their resources are initially. I mean, as an academic advisor, I can tell you I have conversations with my students even before they set foot on campus, so that they know, by the time the 5th or 6th week of the semester comes around, when we know that's a high stress time for students, that there's already a relationship there. I think doing as much relationship building on the front end can be helpful so that there is that comfort level for students to reach out when they're having some difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Now, sleep is something that you've mentioned, and you've been on St. Louis on the Air before to talk about a study that you conducted about the importance of consistent sleep. And again, hard enough for any person to manage. But I remember when I was a first-year college student that sleep was not a priority, though it probably should have been. How do you teach students to prioritize that?
It's a great question. A part of it really has to do with, it begins with anyway, good education around the importance of sleep. I think a lot of times, including college students, we will hear about sleep and think it's not that important because it feels like a passive activity. We don't think that we're doing anything important in sleep. But when you look at the brain science of sleep, when we go to sleep, the brain goes to work. The brain is activating regions that play themselves out both in mental acuity as well as emotion regulation. In fact, you can think about a good night's sleep as like hitting the save button on all the stuff you've learned the day before. So that's how I frame it to my students, that sleep is actually an active part of the learning process. And if you study right before sleep, then you get the benefit of the brain continuing to work on that. So you're sort of able to, you get to enjoy the rest while your brain is still working on that. So now you've got almost like another person who's helping you with that. So I always emphasize the importance of sleep.
And then last question, 30 seconds. Is there a midterm and exam for this course?
Oh, is there? So this is a pass-fail class. So we don't want the class to be something that itself is a source
of stress.
But it's going to be a highly interactive and self-evaluation type course that we're very excited about at WashU.
Tim, thanks for coming back to the show today.
My pleasure.
Today's segment was produced by Aula Kuziz.
With audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.